Welcome to Wine Country in Shorts. I'm Ralph DeAmicis. This is one of several segments that we're doing about the Mira Winery. It's a newer winery just south of Yountville in the Napa Valley.
Well, I think it's like everything that is beautiful in life is nothing planned. It's great. And so I was the winemaker at Mondavi Winery, and one of the jobs that you do as a winemaker is you get to travel around and to promote the wines, and you do winemaker dinners and tasting for sommeliers at restaurants. And I happened to be in Washington, D.C. doing one of these types of activities. And so after one of these events, I just wanted that last cold beer to just kind of wash everything down. Big meal, lots of wine. It's like, I just need a beer, wash it all down, then finish walking to my hotel. So on the way to my hotel, just popped into this place called the Off the Record Bar that, I knew really nothing about, but apparently it's a hangout for people. And I was talking to the bartender, and we were talking about math and science and golden ratios and how credit cards are in golden ratio and things like that. And as I was talking about that, Bear comes in and he sits next to me, and Bear, being a public relations guy, a communications guy, he's a talker, right? So he starts kind of interviewing me about, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. And I told him, well, my name's Gustavo. I'm a winemaker from Napa. He says, in all these years I've been doing this, I've never met a winemaker. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard of, your job. How do you get into that? So, during the course of the evening, talking about being a winemaker in the Napa Valley and things that you need to do to make great wine. And by the end of the night, we became really, really good friends. And I kind of spilled the beans a little bit on him that I wanted to have my own little wine project in the future. And he says, well, I'd like to be a part of that too, if I can in any way. And I said, okay, I've heard that before. I've heard you make friends before in the bar and then nothing happens. But we actually remained in touch for 3 or 4 years. And one of the things that I told him when I met him was, you don't, most of the grape growers in Napa don't make wine, and you just have to know the right people to get the right grapes. And when they become available, you just hire a place that will follow the orders to make the wine for you. And that's kind of how we all got started, and he's really good at putting stories together and taking, I'm more of a technical guy. I'm not as much of a poet when it comes to writing. And he does a really good job of translating some of the technical stuff into poetry, let's say, for people to consume it a little bit easier, maybe, and understand it a little bit easier than just pure technical information. Well, the golden ratio is something that's always been part of our story because it basically kicked off the conversation with Bear. And I've always been fascinated. I love art and I love history and things like that, and math, of course. And we just thought if we ever got the chance to build our own winery, that maybe we'd sneak some of that in, not make it so obvious, because the golden ratio and the Fibonacci numbers are not something that stand out. They're just there, and if you look for it, you find it. And that's kind of what we wanted to do if we ever got the chance to build our own place. So fortunately, when we kicked off, the property was bought in 2016. And the minute we started talking to the architect, we started discussing about how can we incorporate some of this into the architecture of the winery and the hospitality area. This was another thing that we were very, very fortunate, because we started looking for a while for a place. We started our first vintage in 2009. And so we were custom crushing, up until we built the winery in 2016. But the reality is we started looking for a place around 2014. And we looked at a lot of different possibilities. And somehow, through the magic of magic, Bear heard from a friend of a friend that this property was for sale or was going to be for sale. And so he asked me to go take a look. And I said, I know exactly where it is. Because when we get heavy rains here every 10 years, it floods the highway and people can't get through. But I thought, that's going to be a magnificent place for us to maybe establish some new vineyards and to build our winery, because we're in the Yountville, VA. We got excellent visibility. And that's basically how it all came together. It's just, we heard from a friend of a friend, and here we are. We have 10 planted. So when we bought the property, there was Merlot and Chardonnay. There was no buildings. And so we decided, instead of just making room for the building, let's just clear everything out and start over. And so we replanted the 10 acres. We have 6 different varietals. We have Cabernet Franc, 2 different clones, which, we did some research to try to figure out what we thought would work the best on our spot here, knowing that we have a pretty high water table, and we're lucky to have the water that we do in years like this and previous years. And so, we found clones of Cabernet Franc to plant. We found Merlot, Petit Verdot. We're going to work well here. On the white side, I think we know already from the neighbors that whites do really well here. And Sauvignon Blanc is a pretty easy grape to find in the area, but we decided to do something a little bit different. And in addition to planting a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc, plant Sauvignon Gris. And so we're pretty excited about what we planted and what's coming up. And to finish it all off, we planted one block to Cabernet Sauvignon, head trained, non-irrigated. So
I've noticed a whole bunch of head trained vines in the area.
Starting to, yeah. And I know ours are a little bit taller. I noticed a few around here that are on the short side, but we think because of the water table here, it's going to do really, really great. So we had a couple of different architects. The architect of record is Steve Von Racefield. And basically he calls himself, what do they call it? Enotecture, because he specializes in wineries. And so he's the one that we contacted him a while ago before we even had the property, when we were thinking about building a place, just to get opinions on the different sites that we'd been looking at. And so he did a phenomenal job here of putting everything together. And for somebody that knows how to do wineries was essential for us, because a lot of times I worked in other places where it's all about the aesthetics and then the operations suffer a little bit. And he did a fantastic job of putting the production area together too, to knowing what size tanks we can put in there and how much space we need to maneuver and all that stuff. So he was fantastic. I think it's exactly what you just described. There's this comfort level here. And I think that's maybe a little bit, not necessarily a mathematical thing about the golden ratio, but something about that you feel it in the building. It feels so human. The dimensions are very human. And when you go into the cellar and you take a look at the tanks and the size of the operation there, it's very cozy. And then you come here and you have a seat and you have these incredible views of nature, and it just feels very, very human. You feel like you want to be here. And I think we have a problem leaving at the end of the day because it's so beautiful. And when this time of the year, when the sun is starting to set and the shadow of the building is giving a shade on the east side, it's very difficult to leave, especially if you're drinking a glass of wine. But we see that from the people that come visit as well. I'm looking at some of the comments and the reviews that we've gotten, and they just feel like this is such a cozy place to be. And one of the concerns was, were we going to have a lot of road noise? But you really don't hear it.
Not at all.
But this grounding that you speak of was very intentional. We wanted something for people to feel comfortable, like we're inviting them into our house. Well, his thing is like, we'll put it in where we can. We'll incorporate it where possible. And one of the really clever things that he did was when you do the walk around the building, you're going to find a golden spiral. It's basically the center of the property, or the center of the building area anyway. And from there, there's a spiral that starts and then it disappears. And then if you're observant, you'll see that it continues into the tasting room and then down the pathway out to the parking lot. There's a little line that continues down. And so you can see it from the air, but when you're here, it's like what I was talking about earlier, that it's present, but it's not in your face, this golden ratio. And so we've figured out ways to incorporate that in different areas. And one other area that kind of happened on its own was the production area, was the size of the tanks. And so I sized the tanks according, and in my math on my Excel spreadsheet, okay, I need tanks that can accommodate 3 tons of fruit, 5 tons of fruit, 8 tons of fruit. And it turns out 3, 5, and 8 are Fibonacci numbers. And we didn't really think about it until we were actually doing the first walkthrough. And I said, you know what, I'll be darned. 3, 5, and 8. And so one of the other things that grounded us too was we really wanted to feel of the area. And we very much took Yountville, since we're in the AVA, as an inspiration. The old buildings in Yountville, what are they? We have a fantastic view of the Veterans Home. One of the other architects that helped us with the aesthetics, I gave him these different buildings to contemplate and help us come up with a more of the area look, right? And I said the stone buildings and the brick buildings and the tile roofs and things like that harkened back to an era that the valley was just starting out. And then as Bear puts it, the storyteller, we wanted something to look like if George C. Yount walked through here, he would be familiar with the surroundings. Officially, there's 2 of us in production. So we have a very small team in general, and we all end up doing a little bit of everything. Of course, not everybody can be the winemaker, so, I get to keep that title. But yeah, and on the production side, there's just 2 of us, and we've actually worked together for almost 20 years. So in my previous life for Art Mondavi, when I was the winemaker responsible for all the reds, and my assistant winemaker here, Jesus, he was the cellar master. So we were kind of the team, the quarterback and the wide receiver situation, or the pitcher and the catcher, whatever your preference is in sports. And we just worked really, really well together. We have a lot of things that we like in common. And one of the main things that we have in common that we like is making world-class wine. I think that's something that when we worked at Art Mondavi, under the Mondavi family, we really picked up on that, and he's got that same goal here, is that we want to make the best, be among the best winemakers in the world here. So it's great to have somebody like that on the team, and that, you can leave and not have to worry about things not being done correctly, because what you're thinking, he's already doing, and vice versa. Yeah. And I would say, Napa is, after having worked in different parts of the world, Napa is such a unique place to make excellent wine. And, it's like you just described, you don't necessarily have to do much, especially here, to make a really great wine. But if you want to take it to that next level where it's got that, there's something about this wine, but I don't know what it is type thing that you keep going back to, it takes a little bit more than just what nature gives you. You have to have people that are passionate about what they're doing to put that into the wine too, that passion.
Welcome to Wine Country in Short. I'm Ralph DeAmicis. This is another segment we're doing about the Mira winery just south of Yountville in the Napa Valley.
Officially, there's 2 of us in production. So we have a very small team in general, and we all end up doing a little bit of everything. Of course, not everybody can be the winemaker, so, I get to keep that title. But yeah, and on the production side, there's just 2 of us, and we've actually worked together for almost 20 years. So in my previous life for Art Mondavi, when I was the winemaker responsible for all the reds, and my assistant winemaker here, Jesus, he was the cellar master. So we were kind of the team, the quarterback and the wide receiver situation, or the pitcher and the catcher, whatever your preference is in sports. And we just worked really, really well together. We have a lot of things that we like in common. And one of the main things that we have in common that we like is making world-class wine. I think that's something that when we worked at Art Mondavi, under the Mondavi family, we really picked up on that, and he's got that same goal here, is that we want to make the best, be among the best winemakers in the world here. So it's great to have somebody like that on the team, and that, you can leave and not have to worry about things not being done correctly, because what you're thinking, he's already doing, and vice versa. Yeah. And I would say, Napa is, after having worked in different parts of the world, Napa is such a unique place to make excellent wine. And, it's like you just described, you don't necessarily have to do much, especially here, to make a really great wine. But if you want to take it to that next level where it's got that, there's something about this wine, but I don't know what it is type thing that you keep going back to, it takes a little bit more than just what nature gives you. You have to have people that are passionate about what they're doing to put that into the wine too, that passion.
Genius is in the details.
That's right. The genius is in the details.
Now, where is Jesus from?
Jesus is from Guadalajara, Mexico, but he's been in the valley, probably longer than he lived in Mexico. So he's been in the wine industry for quite a long time, and he's also very much involved with the local kids. He's a soccer trainer outside of work. His other passion is soccer, and he's very involved with the community as well, which is great. I think maybe one of his relatives was in Napa, and he came in, and they offered him a job. And like a lot of people, you didn't know that you were going to love being in wine. And he found that he was really good at what he does, and he really enjoyed what he does as well. And it's interesting because we kind of went parallel paths. I started in the lab at Art Mondavi, and he started in the cellar. And we both were about the same age, and he started a year before I did at Mondavi. And we just kind of both kept rising at the same time, but in different departments, which was really, really great. And like I said, Bear, we're just kind of like me and Jesus in the cellar. Bear's like that with me on the communications and stuff like that. A lot of stuff that I'm thinking he's already writing about, or we tend to always have the same opinion about just about everything. It's just I've always loved art. One of my brothers is an architect, and I just remember looking through his magazines and books on world buildings, and through that you start discovering methods of building and things that are hidden in with some of these really ancient buildings. And one of them was the golden ratio, and then just looking some of the classical architecture out there, the Acropolis in Athens and things like that, and then the artwork from Leonardo that incorporates some of this. golden ratio Fibonacci sequence. It's just amazing. And so the more I read about it, the more I was hooked on it, and the more interested I was in it, and just seeing how it is in nature all around us. The galaxy we're in being a spiral galaxy, and how certain plants and crops grow as well. And according to these numbers, the 5-petaled flowers that are pretty common, 8-petaled flowers, and it's just all around us, and it's amazing to me. And then just later down the road, my family, we're from Sacramento. We grew up around agriculture, and my dad worked at a cannery in Sacramento where he canned peaches and tomato, and we made ketchup and tomato sauce, tomato paste for the big names and whatnot. And I just remember the summers, just this level of activity around harvest of those fruits, and going with my dad to the fields to check on stuff and tomatoes or peaches up in the Marysville area to bring to the cannery. It was just, when I was going to college and thinking about the things that I really enjoyed earlier in life, that was it. And I'm thinking, how can I incorporate all this stuff into a career? And then I realized, and at that same time, I was getting into wine, right? And I was looking at labels, and I was understanding what it meant, what's inside, what the label's telling you about what's inside. And it's like, wine is kind of time traveling in a lot of ways. And it's travel in time, but it's also travel to a place. And I was just fascinated by it. And so as I was about to graduate from college, my friend, a really good friend of mine, we used to work at a water slide park together. He was going to UC Davis, and we kind of got together into a little wine tasting group. And I'll never forget, because we had the state fair where the water slide park is in Sacramento. And one of us would go down into the beer and wine garden, spend $50, which was a lot, when you were making $4 an hour back then, sneak it into the backpack and bring it into the money counting room, and we taste this wine while we were eating, right? And that wine was the poet, one of the one where I really started engaging with the idea of I want to be in the wine industry somehow. And in reading the back label of a Ralph Mondavi wine from the 80s, the famous one that talked about wine has been with us since the beginning of civilization, and it's the drink of poets and artists and all this stuff, and part of the gracious way of life. I'm like, that sounds magnificent to me. How do I sign up? And so my friend says, well, you can get a degree in beer making, winemaking at UC Davis. I'm like, I had no idea that you could actually go to school for this. So I pursued that. And then more important than that, I pursued getting a job at Ralph Mondavi, and I got hired on in the lab originally as a harvest lab tech. And that's when I knew that I loved it. My job was going to the different locations in Napa to sample fermenting tanks and barrels and check for sugar levels, and temperature, and set up the samples for tasting for the winemaker. And that's when I knew this is it for me. I love doing this. And I'll never forget the look. I started Labor Day of '95, and I'll never forget coming home, because I was living with my parents in Sacramento, with a bucket and styrofoam cups and lids and a Sharpie and a rubber hose and a lab coat. Right? And so they were all at the state fair. Labor Day back then was the last day of the state fair. And so I got home, I worked from 6 to 2:30, and got home, went directly to sleep to take a nap. And when my parents came home, I was like, is this what we sent you to school for? And I'm like, trust me, Mom, it's going to work out. It's going to be great. Well, I mean, that's part of the fun of being the winemaker is you get to be very creative in your approach to making the wine. And even though we all use barrels and stuff like that, or we all harvest grapes and we put them in tanks, at that point, it becomes kind of your baby, right? Up until that point, it's nature that's kind of telling you what to do, or you're going to do, the grapes are looking like this, or you're going to do that, right? And once you get the stuff into the winery, it's all very intentional. Everything that we do once the grapes are in, how we process them, the barrels that I select for the different wines, and I try to match barrels to wines. I try to get complexity, because most of the stuff that I've been doing has been single vineyard, single varietal. And so in keeping everything separate and in trying to make the best possible representation of that wine that year from those grapes and that vineyard, there's all these other factors that are giving you creative license, but helping you to maybe elevate that wine to something that it wouldn't have been otherwise. If you used all the same barrels, the wine still would be great, but maybe it wouldn't have the soul that it does because you use 7 different barrels or 8 different barrels. It's like you said when I first walked in, to say good morning to you is when you've been doing something for so long, it's a big plus, but it can also be a little bit of a danger because you might get used to doing things the same way. But the way that you really get to know something, or just like a person, is being with them for so long, and working with the same vines for years and years and years, and seeing, different things that happen different years allows you to have that relationship where you can really bring out what's in that vineyard.
Welcome to Wine Country in Shorts. I'm Ralph DeAmicis. This time we're at the Rosa Sculpture Garden in Carneros in southern Napa. It sits right along the highway, just south of the Artesa Winery and just north of the Domaine Carneros Winery. In fact, if you get to a high spot at the Rosa, you can look to the north and you can see the bunker-like building that is Artesa, where it's built into the hillside, which looks so simple here, and yet inside it is so elegant. And from its patios, it looks south, down over the vineyards, over DeRosa Lake, all the way to Domaine Carneros and the bay beyond. Now, this building was patterned upon one of the chateaus that the Tattingers own in Champagne, France. It's obviously very elegant, a champagne house, or a sparkling wine house, to say it more properly. But from their patio, you have beautiful views over Carneros to the east. And if you see that line of hills, that's the far side of the Napa Valley. The buildings at DeRosa are much simpler. They look more like barns, and that's a gallery building. But what's distinctive is the Marc de Souvreau sculpture that sits on the rise next to it. Originally, this lived back in the sculpture garden, back in the sculpture meadow, and all the way at the back of the property, because when it was first installed, the county supervisors didn't want it to be so obvious. So it lived back here. But over the years, they were finally convinced to let them put it at the front, and even though it would have been extremely expensive, with the help of the sculptor, it was moved up into the spot of prominence. So now when people go by, they know this is a sculpture garden. And it has changed the whole identity of the place. Now, it's partially because I think the Dunham Winery, just over the line of Sonoma, has established this massive, or very impressive, sculpture garden on their property, among their vineyards. And I think that the supervisors felt that if Sonoma can do it, why can't we? Now, wherever you are in the front of the property, you can see the de Souvreau. And as you go up onto the building, you'll see you're standing over the Rosa Lake, this beautiful little pond, which is fringed with trees all the way around. And the de Souvreau sits up there on the edge of it, overlooking the road. It's a very dramatic piece. Now, the property is interesting because it has large pieces, what you'd call monumental pieces, and yet they're not so large. They're elegant, and yet they're not really massive. And it's because DeRosa was friends with many of these artists, and he bought these pieces from them early in their careers. For instance, the de Souvreau is a big piece. It's not that big compared to many of his others. These were pieces that they made themselves. These were pieces that they made before they started going to foundries and ateliers to have their pieces constructed. So you might say you can really see the artist's fingerprints in these pieces if you look closely. They're very distinctive, they're human scaled. And that's unique in a sculpture park. Most of the time, sculpture parks are made from large pieces manufactured for the artist. These are the artist's own representations, their original thoughts of what they wanted their artwork to be. And that makes this a unique environment. This piece here is the one truly monumental piece on the property. And this, I think, might be the most whimsical, where it's woven on cables between two eucalyptus trees. And it dances beautifully with the wind. and these vibrant colors. And vibrant colors keep returning here. And this is delightful to see, because to have sculptures that are so playful, you know, made out of steel and ceramic, out of heavy materials. And they're fun, but they're also very elegant. This side garden here, this lawn, has a number of large stone pieces that are very classical. This large plinth, for instance, it's austere. You know, it's dramatic. But you're right here by the side of the lake with these beautiful views. But these pieces make me think of the classical world of Roman ruins, you know, that have just got left behind. These pieces that have just been forgotten about and yet have ended up here. So it's a beautiful sculpture park. Please visit it, and then come visit us at Wine Country in Shorts on YouTube, and please subscribe, and then come back and see us again soon.